The train whistle pierced the Montana air like a desperate prayer as Emma Wilson pressed her forehead against the smudged glass window. Her gloved hand instinctively tightened around her daughter's smaller one, feeling the gentle squeeze returned with innocent strength. 5-year-old Lily slept against her side, unaware that their entire future balanced on the edge of a letter and a promise Emma was beginning to fear might shatter like so many before it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Pine Creek Station, 10 minutes, the conductor bellowed, startling Lily awake. The child's eyes, the same shade of amber as her father's had been, blinked up at Emma with drowsy confusion. Are we there, Mama? Is this where the nice man lives? Emma smoothed her daughter's dark curls, buying herself a moment before answering. Yes, sweetheart. This is where Mr. Reynolds lives. The name felt strange on her tongue after months of correspondence, of carefully penned letters describing a life they might build together, a respectable home for a widow and her child. Thomas Reynolds had written of his cattle ranch, his standing in the community, his desire for a proper wife to bring civilization to his corner of the Montana territory. He had never specifically asked if she had children. She had never specifically told him. 6 months of exchanging letters, of selling nearly everything they owned back in Boston after the influenza took James, Lily's father, before they could marry. 6 months of Emma carefully selecting her words, of deciding that widow would have to suffice, that details about Lily could wait until Thomas Reynolds could see what a wonderful, bright child she was. How could anyone turn away such a sweet little girl once they'd met her? Outside the train window, Pine Creek emerged from the landscape like a tentative afterthought. A dusty main street lined with wooden buildings, false fronts reaching toward the vast Montana sky as if trying to appear grander than they were. In the distance, mountains still capped with May snow stood sentinel over the valley. Remember what we talked about? Emma whispered, adjusting Lily's blue dress and retying the ribbon in her hair. Be on your best behavior. Mr. Reynolds might be surprised to meet you, but once he sees what a good girl you are, I'll be perfect, Lily promised solemnly, straightening her small shoulders. Like a proper lady. The train hissed to a stop, steel wheels grinding against the rails. Emma gathered their single trunk, all that remained of their former life, and led Lily toward the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the conductor helped them down onto the wooden platform. The air smelled of pine, dust, and wood. Smoke. Nothing like the coal-heavy fog of Boston. He wasn't difficult to spot. Thomas Reynolds stood at the far end of the platform, wearing a fine black coat despite the spring warmth. His hat held respectfully in his hands. His beard was neatly trimmed, his boots polished to a shine that looked out of place amid the frontier dust. A successful man, just as his letters had claimed. Emma took a deep breath and approached, guiding Lily beside her. Mr. Reynolds, I'm Emma Wilson. She managed a small smile. Thank you for the train ticket. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. His eyes, cold blue and narrowed, moved from Emma's face to the child beside her, then back again. The smile that had been forming on his lips froze, then disappeared entirely. What is this? He asked, his voice low but sharp enough to draw glances from others on the platform. Emma's throat tightened. This is my daughter Lily. I mentioned in my letters that I was widowed before my wedding day. This is James's child. She squeezed Lily's hand reassuringly. She's a wonderful girl, very well behaved, and you never said anything about a child. Thomas's face had hardened into an unreadable mask. I accepted a widow, Mrs. Wilson, not someone else's. He glanced at Lily, who stared up at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Not additional complications. I didn't think it would matter, Emma said, fighting to keep her voice steady. She's just a little girl. She can help around the house when she's older. She's very bright and this isn't what we agreed to." Thomas stepped back, creating a distance that felt wider than the miles Emma had traveled. "I need a proper wife, a respectable woman to help me build my position here, not someone who brings scandal and a bastard child." The word lashed across Emma's heart like a whip. Lily's small hand tightened on hers, though the child couldn't possibly understand the full meaning of what was happening. "She's not," Emma began, but Thomas held up his hand. "I paid for your ticket, Mrs. Wilson. That debt is settled, but our arrangement is not possible under these circumstances." He looked around, clearly aware of the curious onlookers gathering at the edges of their conversation. "The afternoon stage to Helena leaves at 4. I suggest you find your way back east." "With what money?" Emma's voice finally cracked. "I spent everything I had to come here, to start a new life." "That's not my concern." Thomas settled his head back on his head, his movements precise and cold. "You should have been honest from the beginning." He turned without another word, walking away down the platform and onto Pine Creek's main street. Emma stood frozen, the dust from his departure settling on her worn traveling dress. Lily tugged at her hand. "Mama, doesn't the nice man want us?" A hot sting of tears burned behind Emma's eyes, but she blinked them away. She wouldn't cry, not here, not where everyone could see. "He's just surprised, sweetheart, that's all." But she knew it was more than surprise. She'd seen it in his eyes, that mixture of judgment and dismissal. The same look she'd endured in Boston after James died, and the truth about their situation became impossible to hide. The unmarried mother, the fallen woman, the disappointment. The station agent approached, hat in hand. "Train's leaving, ma'am. You staying or going?" "We're staying," Emma said automatically, though she had no idea what they would do next. The train ticket had been one way. Her few remaining dollars might buy a night at the boarding house, if Pine Creek had such a place. But after that— "Your trunk, ma'am?" the agent prompted. "Yes, thank you." She fumbled in her reticule for a coin to tip him, but the man waved it away after glancing at Lily. "I'll have one of the boys bring it to the hotel for you," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. The platform emptied as the train prepared for departure. Emma led Lily down the steps and onto Pine Creek's main street, the spring sun beating down on them with unexpected intensity. She had to find shelter, water, something to eat, one step at a time. She'd survived worse. "Are we going to live here now?" Lily asked, skipping beside her to keep up with Emma's hurried pace. "I don't know yet," Emma answered honestly. "First, we need to find somewhere to rest." The street was busier than it had appeared from the train, with horses hitched outside, the general store, men gathering outside one of the saloons, a wagon loaded with lumber rolling past. Emma approached the general store, thinking she might ask for directions to a respectable boarding house. Martha Peterson looked up from behind the counter as the bell above the door announced new customers. Her gaze immediately fell on Lily, then traveled to Emma's travel-worn appearance. "Good afternoon," Emma said, summoning what dignity she could. "I've just arrived in town and wondered if you might direct me to a boarding house, somewhere respectable where my daughter and I might stay." Martha's eyebrows rose slightly. "You'd be Mrs. Wilson, I expect, Thomas Reynolds' mail-order bride." The news had traveled faster than Emma could have imagined. "I am Emma Wilson, yes," she answered carefully. Martha leaned across the counter. "Word travels mighty quick in a small town, Mrs. Wilson, especially when Thomas Reynolds has been bragging about his Boston bride for weeks." Her eyes darted to Lily again, though he never mentioned a child. "No," Emma said, her spine stiffening. "He didn't know." Martha studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Pine Creek Hotel is at the end of the street. Mrs. Keller runs it. Decent enough, but she charges $1 a night. If you're looking for something cheaper, there's rooms above the silver dollar, but it's no place for a child." "Thank you," Emma said. though the information only increased her anxiety. $1 a night would drain her remaining funds in 3 days. The afternoon sun had started its descent behind the mountains by the time Emma made her decision. The Pine Creek Hotel was indeed at the end of the street as Martha had described, a 2-story clapboard building with peeling white paint and a small sign swinging in the spring breeze. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mrs. Keller, a thin woman with graying hair pulled into a severe bun, had looked Emma and Lily up and down with barely concealed suspicion, but had accepted $1 for a night's lodging. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the back alley. Emma had helped Lily wash away the grime of travel, brushed her daughter's hair with the tortoiseshell brush that had once belonged to her own mother, and tucked her in for a nap. Then she had sat on the edge of the bed, calculating and recalculating their meager funds until the numbers blurred before her eyes. 3 days. 3 days to find work, find a more permanent place to stay, or somehow earn enough for 2 tickets back east. But back to what? Their tiny Boston apartment had been rented to a new family. Her position as a seamstress at Harrington's dress shop had been filled. She had burned her bridges, believing that Thomas Reynolds represented a new beginning. Emma pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, refusing to let despair take hold. She had overcome worse obstacles for Lily's sake. When James died and her parents disowned her, when the neighbors turned their backs, when the only work she could find barely kept them fed. She had endured it all. This was just another challenge to overcome. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. She smoothed her skirts and checked that Lily still slept before opening it a crack. Mrs. Keller stood in the hallway, arms folded across her chest. "There's a man asking for you downstairs, Mrs. Wilson, a Mr. Reynolds." Emma's heart leapt, then immediately sank again. Had Thomas reconsidered, or had he come to demand the return of the train ticket money? Either way, she wouldn't beg. "Tell him I'll be down shortly," she said, closing the door to check her appearance in the small mirror above the washstand. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but she pinned her hair neatly and straightened her collar before glancing at Lily's sleeping form. "I'll be right back, sweetheart," she whispered, though the child couldn't hear her. The hotel's small lobby was empty, save for a single figure standing near the window, his back to her, as he gazed out at the street. For a moment, Emma thought Mrs. Keller had been mistaken. This wasn't Thomas Reynolds. This man was taller, broader of shoulder, his clothes dusty from the trail rather than freshly brushed. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and Emma stopped short. No, definitely not Thomas. This man had a weathered face, lines etched around eyes that had spent too long squinting into the sun. A faded blue shirt rolled up at the sleeves revealed, forearms corded with muscle. His hat, held respectfully in his hands, was battered from years of use. "Mrs. Wilson?" His voice was deep, with a hint of gravel, as if he didn't use it often. "Yes," she answered cautiously. "And you are?" "Jackson Miller. I own the Broken Spur Ranch, few miles outside town." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the formality of the introduction. Word travels fast in Pine Creek. "So I've discovered," Emma said, her voice cooling. Had he come to stare at the rejected mail-order bride, to offer unwelcome charity, or something worse? "I heard about your situation with Reynolds," he continued, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. "Got me thinking. Mr. Miller, if you've come to offer me a position as your housekeeper or laundress, I should tell you that I have a young daughter to consider, and I wouldn't—" "No, ma'am," he interrupted, a flicker of something like offense crossing his face. "Nothing like that." Emma waited, growing increasingly puzzled as the man twisted his hat in his hands, clearly gathering his thoughts. Thing is, Mrs. Wilson, I've got a ranch that's doing well enough. Built a proper house. 2 bedrooms, solid roof. Got 60 head of cattle, good grazing land, and a contract with the army at Fort Harrison that keeps us in steady money. He paused, and Emma wondered where this inventory of his possessions was leading. What I don't have, he continued more quietly, is anyone to come home to. Lost my wife Sarah 3 years back to the fever. Been running the place alone since, except for Frank, my ranch hand. Understanding began to dawn on Emma, but it seemed too impossible to believe. Mr. Miller, are you proposing an arrangement? Kind of. He met her eyes directly for the first time. I need a wife, not just for cooking and keeping house, though that would be welcome, but for... He gestured vaguely. Companionship, someone to talk to besides the horses. He cleared his throat. You need a home for you and your girl. I've got room. It seemed like maybe we could help each other out. Emma stared at him, stunned. You don't even know me, Mr. Miller. I know you're brave enough to travel halfway across the country for a new start. I know Reynolds is a fool for turning away a woman with that kind of courage. His expression softened slightly. And I know what it's like to be alone in a place that don't always welcome strangers. My daughter, Emma said, still struggling to process his offer. Lily is 5. She's spirited and sometimes loud. She's not just an accessory to me, she's my whole world. Jackson nodded. I like children, Mrs. Wilson. Always wanted some of my own. Sarah and I didn't get the chance. A shadow passed over his face. Your girl would be welcome. There's a creek near the house where she could play. In summer, I could teach her to ride when she's ready. Emma's mind raced. This wasn't at all what she had expected when she came to Montana. She had resigned herself to the idea of a pragmatic partnership with Thomas Reynolds, a marriage of convenience rather than passion. But at least she had corresponded with him for months. Jackson Miller was a complete stranger. Why? She asked finally. Why would you offer this to someone you've never met? Someone who's already been deemed unsuitable by one of your neighbors? He huffed something close to a laugh. Reynolds and I ain't exactly in the same circles, ma'am. He's concerned with appearances and working his way up in society. I'm concerned with keeping my cattle healthy and having someone to share a meal with at the end of the day. He paused. As for why, I reckon I know what it feels like to be at the end of your rope with nowhere to turn. Emma studied him, searching for any hint of deception or ulterior motive. But his eyes remained steady, his expression open. I would need time, she said finally, to consider your offer, to make sure it would be good for Lily. Of course, he nodded, settling his hat back on his head. I'm staying at the livery tonight, heading back to the ranch tomorrow. If you want to talk more, or if you decide you'd like to see the place, you can find me there. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Mrs. Wilson. I'm not asking for anything you're not willing to give. This would be a proper marriage, but I understand if you need time before it becomes anything more than a practical arrangement. A flush of heat rose to Emma's cheeks at his directness, but she appreciated his honesty. Thank you, Mr. Miller, that's considerate. After he left, Emma stood in the empty lobby for a long time, her thoughts churning. When she finally returned to the room, Lily was awake, sitting cross-legged on the bed and playing with the rag, doll that had been her constant companion since leaving Boston. Mama, I'm hungry, she announced, looking up with James's eyes. I know, sweetheart. Emma sat beside her, smoothing the dark curls away from her daughter's forehead. We'll get something to eat soon. But first, I need to ask you something important. Lily set the doll aside, immediately sensing her mother's serious tone. What would you think about living on a ranch with horses and cows and a creek to play in? Lily's eyes widened. Like in your storybooks, with cowboys? Something like that, Emma said, smiling despite herself. There's a man who has a ranch. His name is Mr. Miller, and he's offered to give us a home. Is he nice? Lily asked, the simplicity of the question cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Emma thought of Jackson Miller's weathered face, the careful way he'd held his hat, the directness of his gaze when he spoke of her courage. I think he might be, she answered honestly, but I don't know him very well yet. Is he nicer than the other man, the one who didn't want us? Emma gathered Lily into her arms, holding her close. I don't know that either, sweetheart. But tomorrow, we might go see his ranch and find out more about him. Would that be all right? Lily nodded against her shoulder. Will there be horses? He said there would be. Then I think we should go, Lily declared, with the simple logic of childhood. And if he's mean, we can leave. Right, Mama? Emma kissed the top of her head, wishing life could always be as straightforward as her daughter made it seem. Right, sweetheart. We always have choices. That night, as Lily slept curled against her side in the narrow hotel bed, Emma stared at the ceiling, weighing her options. She could try to find work in Pine Creek, though her reception so far didn't bode well for how she'd be treated. She could spend her remaining money on stage tickets to Helena, though what waited for them there was just another unknown. Or she could accept Jackson Miller's unexpected proposal, a stranger offering shelter, security, and perhaps eventually something more. None of her choices were ideal. All carried risk, but as she finally drifted towards sleep, Emma found her thoughts returning to the steady gaze of a man who'd recognized courage in her when others had only seen scandal. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the spring air carrying the scent of pine and possibility. Emma dressed carefully in her second-best dress, the blue calico that brought out the color in her eyes, and arranged Lily's hair in neat braids tied with ribbons saved from her sewing basket. Remember, Lily, she said as they left the hotel, their trunk stored temporarily in Mrs. Keller's back room. We're just going to look at Mr. Miller's ranch. I haven't decided anything yet. I know, Mama, Lily replied, skipping alongside her, but I hope there are foals. Baby horses are the best kind. The livery stable stood at the western edge of town, its wide doors open to the morning sunshine. Jackson Miller was already outside, loading supplies into a wagon. He'd shaved, Emma noticed, and wore a clean shirt beneath his worn leather vest. He nodded when he saw them approaching, something like relief flashing briefly across his face. Mrs. Wilson, Miss Lily. He tipped his hat to both of them, then crouched down to Lily's level. I hear you might like to see some horses. Lily, usually shy with strangers, nodded eagerly. Do you have baby ones? As a matter of fact, we do. Mare foaled just last week. Prettiest little filly you ever saw. Lily's eyes widened in delight, and Emma felt a knot in her chest loosen slightly at the natural way Jackson spoke to her daughter. We've decided to accept your invitation to visit the ranch, she said as he straightened. But I want to be clear that I haven't made any decisions. Beyond that, understood. He gestured to the wagon. It's about an hour's ride. I've got a blanket on the seat to keep the splinters away. As they traveled out of Pine Creek, the landscape opened up around them, revealing rolling grasslands dotted with sagebrush and stands of pine. The distant mountains stood watch, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the morning light. Lily peppered Jackson with questions about animals, the ranch, and whether he knew how to make gingerbread, her favorite treat, which he answered with patient good humor. You don't have to entertain her, Emma said during a rare lull. She can talk the ear off a cornstalk when she gets going. I don't mind, he replied, glancing at Lily, who was now watching a hawk circle overhead. Been too quiet for too long at my place. They crested a gentle rise, and Jackson drew the wagon to a halt. There it is, Broken Spur. Below them stretched a small valley cradled in the arms of pine-covered hills. A creek wound through it like a silver ribbon, widening into a pond near a cluster of buildings. The main house was larger than Emma had expected, a proper two-story structure with a covered porch wrapping around one side. A barn stood nearby, alongside a corral where several horses grazed. Beyond, cattle dotted the hillsides, dark shapes against the spring green. "It's beautiful," Emma said softly, surprised by the sincerity in her own voice. "Built most of it." "Myself," Jackson replied, a hint of pride breaking through his usual reserve. "Started with just the cabin part, added on as the herd grew." As they continued down the slope toward the ranch, Emma noticed smoke rising from the chimney. Jackson followed her gaze. "That'll be Frank starting the stove. He's been with me since the beginning. Good man. Keeps to himself mostly." The wagon rattled over a small wooden bridge spanning the creek, and Lily squealed in delight at the sight of the clear water flowing beneath them. "Can I play there, Mama, please?" "We'll see, sweetheart." Emma's caution was automatic, though the creek looked shallow and inviting. "It's safe enough in that spot," Jackson said. "Gets deeper by the pond, but there's a good swimming hole for hot days." They pulled up in front of the house, and Emma's practiced eye took in the details. Clean swept porch, curtains at the windows, a small stand of apple trees to one side just beginning to flower. Someone, Jackson or this Frank he mentioned, took pride in the place. A lean, weathered man emerged from the barn as they arrived, wiping his hands on a rag. His hair was more salt than pepper, his face deeply lined, but his movements were quick and purposeful as he approached. "Frank, this is Mrs. Wilson and Miss Lily," Jackson called down. "They've come to see the place." Frank studied them for a moment, then nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Ma'am, little miss." He didn't ask questions, which Emma appreciated. Clearly, Jackson had already explained the situation to him. "Mr. Miller has invited us to look around," Emma said, accepting Jackson's help down from the wagon. "He speaks highly of you." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, crossed Frank's face before he nodded again. "Boss is fair in his judgments." He turned to Jackson. "Coffee's hot if you want to show them inside. Mare's looking restless, though." "The foal okay?" Jackson asked, immediately concerned. "Fine, far as I can tell. Just keeps pacing." "I'd better check on her." Jackson glanced at Emma. "Would you mind if—" "We can wait," Emma assured him, seeing Lily practically bouncing with anticipation. "I think someone would be very disappointed if she didn't get to see that foal you mentioned." Relief and something like gratitude flashed across Jackson's face. "Won't take long. Frank can show you inside if you'd like to freshen up." Frank led them to the house while Jackson strode toward the barn. The interior was surprisingly comfortable, with solid wooden furniture, braided rugs on the plank floors, and an open layout that allowed sunlight to fill the main room. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, flanked by bookshelves that, to Emma's pleased surprise, held actual books. "Kitchen's through there," Frank said, gesturing to a doorway. "Bedroom's upstairs. Boss's is the one at the back. Other one's empty." His tone remained neutral, but Emma understood the implied message. Jackson had been honest about the accommodations. "It's lovely," she said truthfully. After the cramped tenement in Boston and the stark hotel room in Pine Creek, the house felt spacious and welcoming despite its simple furnishings. Frank nodded toward a basin of water on a side table. "For washing up. I'll be outside if you need anything." He tipped his hat and departed, leaving Emma and Lily alone to explore. "Mama, look!" Lily had already discovered a wooden rocking chair by the window with a patchwork cushion. "It's just like Grandma's," Emma smiled, remembering the chair her mother had rocked her in as a child, before shame and propriety had driven a wedge between them. "Yes, it is rather similar," She moved through the room, noting details, hand-carved frames around unadorned windows, a shelf of jars filled with preserved fruits and vegetables, a book of poetry lying open on a small table. These weren't the possessions of a man concerned, only with cattle and profit. The kitchen was well organized, with a cast-iron stove, a dry sink beneath a window overlooking a small vegetable garden, and a sturdy table with 4 chairs. Someone had made an effort to create a home here, even without a woman's touch. Upstairs, she hesitated before looking into Jackson's bedroom, feeling like an intruder, but she needed to understand what kind of man was offering them shelter. The room was spare but tidy. A large bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser with a shaving mirror, a small desk beneath the window. No personal items were visible beyond a silver pocket watch on the bedside table and a daguerreotype in a simple frame. Emma couldn't help herself. She picked up the frame and studied the woman pictured there. Sarah Miller had been beautiful, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Jackson had placed the photograph where it would be the last thing he saw at night and the first thing he saw in the morning. "She's pretty," Lily said, peering around Emma at the picture. "Is that Mr. Miller's wife?" "Yes," Emma said, setting the frame carefully back in place. "She died, sweetheart, like your father did." Lily considered this with the solemn wisdom children sometimes possess. "Is that why he's sad in his eyes?" Emma looked down at her perceptive daughter. "I think it might be." The sound of boots on the stairs prompted them to move away from the personal items. Jackson appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral at finding them in his bedroom. "Mare's settling down," he said. "Frank thinks she was just restless. The foal's doing fine if you'd like to see her." "Yes, please." Lily bounced on her toes. Jackson led them back outside and to the barn, where the air was warm and filled with the scent of hay and horses. In a stall at the far end, a chestnut mare stood protectively over a gangly-legged foal, with a white blaze down its face. "She was born last week," Jackson said, his voice softening as he spoke of the animals. "First of the season." Lily pressed close to the stall door, her eyes wide with wonder. "What's her name?" Jackson looked surprised by the question. Hadn't given her one yet. "All horses need names," Lily said with the conviction of a child stating an obvious truth. "Maybe you could help with that," Jackson suggested, and Emma felt something in her chest tighten at the simple kindness of the gesture. They spent the next hour touring the ranch, the vegetable garden where Jackson explained he grew most of their food, the smokehouse where meat was preserved, the tool shed where he'd built much of the furniture in the house. Throughout, he spoke, plainly about the work involved, neither sugarcoating the difficulties nor exaggerating the rewards. "It's hard country," he told Emma as they watched Lily chase butterflies near the creek. "Winters can be brutal. Summer brings drought some years. But the land gives back if you treat it right." "You love it here," Emma observed, not a question but a statement. He nodded, squinting into the distance. "Never felt at home anywhere else." Emma understood. She had never felt that kind of belonging. Not in her parents' rigid household, not in the crowded Boston tenements. She had always been searching for something, safety perhaps, or a place where she and Lily could just be, without judgment or shame. "Why me?" she asked finally, the question that had been burning since his unexpected proposal. There must be women in the territory who would be happy to marry a man with a successful ranch. Women without complications. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, watching Lily dance along the creek bank. "I tried that route once," corresponded with a widow from Colorado. "She came, took one look at the isolation, and left on the next stage." He shrugged. "Most women want town life, or at least neighbors close enough to visit. And you think I'd be different because I'm desperate?" The words came out sharper than she'd intended. "No," he said, meeting her eyes directly. "Because you traveled across the country for a chance at something better. That takes courage. And because," He hesitated, then finished, "Because you love that little girl enough to risk everything for her. That kind of love makes people strong in ways that matter out here." The simplicity of his answer caught Emma off guard. Before she could respond, Lily came running back, her hands cupped around something. "Look, Mama. Look, Mr. Miller." She opened her fingers to reveal a tiny green frog. "Can I keep him? Please?" Jackson crouched down to her level. "He probably has a family nearby, Miss Lily. But I could help you build a special place to watch him and his friends if you visit again." Lily's face lit up. "We will visit again, won't we, Mama?" Emma looked from her daughter's hopeful face to Jackson's carefully neutral one. She had come to Montana seeking security, perhaps respect. What Jackson Miller offered was not the polished respectability that Thomas Reynolds had promised, but something more fundamental. A home built with his own hands, work with purpose, and the kind of quiet dignity that came from meeting challenges head on. "I think we might," she said slowly, "if Mr. Miller is agreeable." "I am." The corners of his mouth turned up slightly, the closest thing to a smile she'd seen from him yet. As they prepared to return to town, Emma made her decision. She would give this unusual arrangement a chance, not just for Lily's sake, but for her own. Life had taught her that certainty was an illusion, that plans could shatter in an instant. But perhaps that was all the more reason to recognize opportunity when it appeared, even in unexpected forms. "Mr. Miller," she said as he helped them, "into the wagon. If your offer still stands, I'd like to accept it, for myself and for Lily." His hands stilled on the reins. "You're sure? It won't be easy." "Nothing worthwhile ever is," she replied. "But I think we could build something good here." He nodded once, a gesture that conveyed more than words could have. "We'll head back to town and collect your things. Frank will prepare the spare room for the little one." "And we can see the horses again?" Lily asked eagerly. "Every day if you want," Jackson assured her. As the wagon rolled back toward Pine Creek, Emma felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The future remained uncertain, the path ahead uncharted. But for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something dangerous and fragile: hope. 3 days later, Sheriff Caleb Davis witnessed a simple ceremony in his office. Emma Wilson became Emma Miller, her hand steady as she signed the marriage certificate. Jackson's signature beside hers was careful, each letter formed with deliberate precision. There was no celebration afterward, no wedding guests beyond Frank and Lily, who served as witnesses with solemn pride. But as they drove back to Broken Spur, home, Emma reminded herself, Jackson reached across the wagon seat and briefly covered her hand with his. "Thank you," he said simply. She understood what he meant. Thank you for taking the risk, for bringing life back to an empty house, for offering companionship to replace loneliness. "Thank you as well," she replied, watching Lily doze against her side, the child's face peaceful in sleep. "For seeing us as a blessing rather than a burden." That night, after settling Lily in her new bedroom with its view of the mountains, Emma stood on the porch and watched the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. Jackson joined her, offering a cup of coffee, which she accepted gratefully. "I meant what I said before," he told her, "about giving you time. Your room is yours for as long as you need it to be." The consideration in his voice touched her. "I appreciate that," she said. I think we need to know each other first. Really know each other." He nodded. "Seems sensible." They stood in companionable silence, watching the moon rise over the distant peaks. It wasn't love, not yet. Maybe not ever in the way poets described, but it was a beginning, an alliance formed of mutual need and cautious respect. In time, perhaps it could grow into something deeper. For now, it was enough that Lily would sleep safely tonight, that the roof above them was sound, that tomorrow would bring honest work rather than desperate searching. It was enough that Jackson Miller had seen worth in a woman another man had deemed damaged. Enough that he spoke to her daughter with kindness and looked at Emma with quiet appreciation rather than judgment. "I think we'll be all right here," she said softly, as much to herself as to him. Jackson didn't respond with empty reassurances or grand promises. Instead, he simply nodded, his shoulder almost but not quite touching hers, as they stood together under the endless sky, two solitary souls who had found in each other the possibility of no longer being alone. The weeks that followed brought adjustments for them all. Emma learned the rhythms of ranch life, rising before dawn, the constant cycle of cooking, cleaning, mending, and tending the garden that kept them fed. Lily thrived in the open spaces, naming every animal she encountered, including the chestnut foal she'd christened Butterscotch for her golden coat. Jackson proved to be a man of few words, but consistent actions. He never raised his voice, never came to the table with dirty hands, never failed to thank Emma for meals or ask about Lily's latest discoveries. In the evenings, Emma sometimes caught him watching them with a kind of quiet wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe they were there. They developed small rituals, coffee on the porch at sunrise, Jackson pointing out deer at the edge of the meadow to a sleepy-eyed Lily. Sunday dinners with Frank joining them at the table, gradually sharing stories of his own family back east. Jackson reading aloud from one of his books after supper, while Emma mended and Lily played with carved wooden animals he had begun making for her. The separate bedrooms remained separate, though sometimes Emma would wake in the night and hear Jackson pacing the floor above. His sleeplessness, a reminder of wounds not yet healed. On those nights, she would lie awake too, wondering about the woman in the photograph and the life Jackson had imagined with her. It was a quiet existence, marked more by small kindnesses than dramatic gestures. When Emma mentioned missing her sewing work, Jackson returned from town the next day with fine fabric and new needles. When Lily expressed curiosity about the cattle, he fashioned a small saddle for the gentlest mare and taught her to ride. When Emma struggled with the heavy water bucket, he installed a pump in the kitchen without being asked. June brought the first real test of their fragile partnership. Thomas Reynolds, accompanied by his mother Eleanor, arrived unannounced at Broken Spur one afternoon. Emma was alone, Jackson and Frank having ridden out to check the northern pasture. Lily napping upstairs. She saw the fancy buggy approaching and felt her stomach tighten with anxiety. Thomas stepped down first, then helped his mother, a thin woman with sharp features and elaborate dress, unsuited to ranch visits. "Mrs. Miller," Thomas said, emphasizing her new name with faint distaste. "Or do you still prefer Wilson?" Emma straightened her spine, willing her voice to remain steady. "Miller is fine. What brings you to Broken Spur, Mr. Reynolds?" "Mother wished to see the child," he said stiffly. She felt concerned about the circumstances. Eleanor Reynolds stepped forward, appraising Emma with cold eyes. "We've heard troubling things about this hasty arrangement, young woman. A child deserves proper upbringing, not isolation on a cattle ranch with a man of questionable background." Anger flared in Emma's chest, hot and protective. "My daughter is well cared for, Mrs. Reynolds. Better than she would have been with a man who judged her before even learning her name." "A respectable household," Eleanor began, but Emma cut her off. "Respectability means different things to different people. To me, it means honesty, kindness, and putting a child's needs before appearances. My husband provides all of that." The word husband still felt strange on her tongue, but she spoke it with deliberate emphasis. Thomas's face flushed. "You barely know the man. Mother has connections in Helena who could help place the child in a proper home if you're finding the situation difficult." The threat was thinly veiled, and Emma felt cold fear pierce through her anger. But before she could respond, a small voice called from the doorway. "Mama, who's here?" Lily stood on the porch, hair mussed from her nap, clutching the wooden horse Jackson had carved for her. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she studied the child. So this is the girl. Come here, child. Let me look at you. Lily glanced at Emma, who nodded reassuringly while moving to stand protectively beside her daughter. Lily, this is Mrs. Reynolds and her son, Mr. Reynolds. They're from town. Are they here to see Butterscotch? Lily asked, referencing her beloved foal. Papa Jack says she's growing faster than a weed in summer. The casual use of Papa Jack, Lily's recent name for Jackson, clearly startled the visitors. It had startled Emma the first time she'd heard it too, but Jackson had accepted the title with quiet dignity, his eyes suspiciously bright. No, dear, Eleanor said, her tone softening slightly. We were just concerned about your welfare. Lily looked confused. Why? We have everything we need. Mama makes the best bread, and Papa Jack is teaching me to ride, and I have my own room with a window where I can see the mountains. She held up the wooden horse. He made this for me too. The simple declaration, delivered with a child's innocent certainty, seemed to take some of the wind from Eleanor's sails. She glanced at Thomas, who shifted uncomfortably. The sound of approaching horses announced Jackson and Frank's return. They rode into the yard, taking in the scene with quick assessment. Jackson dismounted in one fluid motion, handing his reins to Frank before approaching. Reynolds, he acknowledged with a nod. Mrs. Reynolds, this is unexpected. We were just leaving, Thomas said stiffly. Eleanor wasn't so easily dissuaded. Mr. Miller, surely you understand our concern. This arrangement was very sudden. The child barely knows you. Jackson moved to stand beside Emma and Lily, not touching them, but positioned so they formed a clear unit. I appreciate your concern, ma'am, but Emma and Lily are my family now. They'll want for nothing as long as I draw breath. The simple declaration, delivered without drama or defensiveness, carried more weight than any heated argument could have. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Very well. But Pine Creek will be watching, Mr. Miller. A child's welfare is everyone's concern. After they departed, Jackson turned to Emma, his expression concerned. Are you all right? She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. They can't take her, can they? No, he said firmly. You're her mother. We're legally married. The law's on our side. He hesitated, then added more gently, but if you ever want to leave, Emma, you can. You're not trapped here. The offer, made at the moment when another man might have asserted ownership or demanded gratitude, told Emma everything she needed to know about Jackson Miller. He valued her choice, her agency, even when it might cost him the family he was beginning to care for. This is our home, she said, the words feeling right as she spoke them. We're not going anywhere. That night, after Lily was asleep, Emma approached Jackson as he sat on the porch, whittling a new wooden animal. Without a word, she sat beside him and rested her head against his shoulder. He stiffened in surprise, then slowly relaxed, his arm coming around her with tentative care. They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars emerge, the silence between them comfortable and right. It wasn't passion, not yet, but it was the beginning of trust, of something that might one day grow into love. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing worth in us when others didn't. His hand found hers in the darkness, calloused, fingers wrapping gently around her own. I should be thanking you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. This place was just a house before. You and Lily made it a home. Summer flowed into autumn, autumn into winter. The separate bedrooms gradually became a formality, abandoned after the first snowstorm, when sharing warmth became both practical and desired. Their physical relationship developed as naturally as their emotional one, tentative at first, then increasingly confident as they learned each other's needs and desires. By spring, when the wildflowers painted the meadows with color and new calves wobbled on spindly legs beside their mothers, Emma knew she was carrying Jackson's child. She told him as they stood together watching Lily chase butterflies. Her riding skills now confident enough that she could manage her mare without assistance. Jackson's hand trembled as he placed it over her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Our baby." Emma covered his hand with her own. "Our family," she corrected gently. "All of us." He nodded, eyes suspiciously bright, as he watched Lily gallop toward them, her face alight with joy. "All of us," he agreed. Words spread through Pine Creek as it inevitably would. But this time, the whispers held no judgment, only acknowledgement of what many had come to recognize, that the mail-order bride rejected for her circumstances had found something more valuable than the respectability Thomas Reynolds offered. She had found a man who saw strength in her struggles, who valued the child another had deemed a burden, who understood that family was built not through blood or appearances but through choice, day by day. When Thomas Reynolds married a banker's daughter from Helena that summer, Emma and Jackson attended the ceremony, Lily between them in her best dress, their quiet dignity a testament to how far they had come. Eleanor Reynolds nodded to them from across the church, a grudging respect in her eyes. By the time their son was born in late autumn, a healthy boy they named Samuel after Jackson's father, the story of their beginning had already begun to fade, replaced by the reality of who they had become to each other. Not a desperate woman and a lonely rancher bound by convenience, but partners who had built something neither could have created alone. A family forged from rejection, strengthened by adversity, and sustained by the quiet, steady love that grows. Not from passion, but from countless small kindnesses exchanged day after day. Years later, when visitors asked how they met, Emma and Jackson would exchange a glance and smile, the private understanding between them worth more than any romantic tale. "He saw me," Emma would say simply, when no one else did. And Jackson, a man of few words but deep feeling, would add only, "They were the best things that ever happened to me." It wasn't the story Emma had imagined for herself when she'd boarded that train to Montana, a desperate woman with a child and little hope. It was better, not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real, built on truth rather than appearances, on acceptance rather than conditions, on the love that grows strongest when it begins by seeing worth in what others cast aside. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Summer settled over Broken Spur Ranch like a warm blanket, bringing long days of sunshine and evening skies painted in impossible colors. Emma had never experienced Montana's seasons before, the intensity of each one taking her by surprise. The heat was different here, dry and clean, unlike Boston's oppressive humidity that had left her clothing perpetually damp and her spirits low. Here, even on the hottest days, a breeze wandered down from the mountains, carrying the scent of pine and wild sage. July marked 2 months since she and Lily had come to live at the ranch. 2 months of learning new routines, of finding their place in this unfamiliar world. 2 months of watching Jackson Miller, her husband in name, still largely a stranger in truth, move through his days with quiet purpose. They had settled into an uneasy rhythm, polite and careful around each other, like dancers who knew the steps but hadn't yet found the music. Emma woke before dawn, as had become her habit. The house was still and quiet, Jackson having left even earlier to help Frank move cattle to the upper pastures, where the grass remained green despite the summer heat. She slipped from her bed in the small room across the hall from Lily's, the floorboards cool beneath her bare feet. Soon, the sun would transform the house into an oven, but for now, the morning offered blessed coolness. In the kitchen, she built a fire in the stove and put coffee on to boil. These quiet moments had become precious, time to gather her thoughts before the day's demands began. Through the window, she could see the first blush of dawn painting the eastern sky, the mountains, slowly emerging from darkness like giants waking from slumber. She had just poured herself a cup of coffee when a small sound made her turn. Lily stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, clutching her rag doll. At 5, her daughter was already showing signs of the beauty she would one day become. James's amber eyes set in a face that mirrored Emma's own. "Good morning, sweetheart," Emma said, opening her arms. Lily padded across the floor and climbed into her mother's lap, still warm and drowsy. "Is Papa Jack home yet?" The name still startled Emma occasionally, though Jackson had accepted the title with quiet dignity when Lily had first bestowed it on him 3 weeks earlier. The child had taken to ranch life with remarkable ease, forming an immediate bond with the animals. And, more surprisingly, with the reserved man who had given them shelter. "Not yet," Emma answered, smoothing Lily's dark curls. "He and Frank are moving the cattle today, remember? They'll be back for supper." Lily nodded against her shoulder. "Can we bake cookies for them? With cinnamon?" "We can try." Emma smiled into her daughter's hair, "though I'm still getting used to that temperamental stove." The Monarch cast iron range had become Emma's daily adversary, running too hot or too cool with seemingly no middle ground. Jackson had shown her how to adjust the dampers, but the stove remained stubbornly unpredictable. "I'll help," Lily declared with childish confidence. "Papa Jack says I'm a good helper." Emma felt a familiar twinge, part gratitude, part unease, at how easily her daughter had accepted this new life, this new man. Lily had asked about Thomas Reynolds only once, wondering why the other man hadn't wanted them. Emma had struggled to provide an explanation suitable for a child's understanding. "Sometimes people make choices based on what they think they want," she'd said carefully. "Mr. Reynolds thought he wanted a certain kind of family, and he didn't. Understand that you and I are already a complete family on our own. But now we have Papa Jack too," Lily had responded simply. "And he likes us just how we are." The uncomplicated certainty of her daughter's statement had lingered with Emma for days afterward. Did Jackson truly like them as they were? Or was this arrangement still merely one of convenience for him? A wife to cook and clean, perhaps eventually to share his bed. A child to bring life to empty rooms. In their 2 months at Broken Spur, Jackson had been unfailingly kind, respectful of Emma's boundaries, patient with Lily's endless questions, generous with the home and land he had built. But he remained something of a mystery, revealing little of himself beyond practical matters related to the ranch. Emma knew he had grown up in Missouri, had fought briefly for the Union before a bullet through his shoulder had sent him home, had headed west after the war, like so many restless men searching for a fresh start. She knew he had met Sarah in Helena, where she'd been teaching school, had built this house plank by plank to give her a proper home. She knew Sarah had died 3 years ago from the fever that had swept through the region, taking many lives with it. But she didn't know what made him laugh, what haunted his dreams, what hopes he carried beneath his stoic exterior. Sometimes she caught him watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice, his expression unreadable. "Mama, you're squeezing me too tight." Emma loosened her arms, realizing she had been clutching Lily to her chest. "Sorry, sweetheart. I was just thinking." "About what?" "About how lucky we are to have this nice home," she answered, the half-truth. Coming easily, no need to burden a child with adult complexities. After breakfast, they tackled the daily chores that kept the household running, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, tending the vegetable garden that provided much of their food. Emma had quickly learned that ranch life was a continuous cycle of work, each task flowing into the next, with little room for idleness. By mid-morning, the summer heat had settled in earnest. Emma wiped perspiration from her forehead as she pinned sheets to the clothesline, the fresh laundry almost dry before she finished hanging it. Lily played nearby, building a house of twigs for a grasshopper she had befriended. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Emma's attention. A rider was coming down the road from town, not Jackson or Frank, whose horses she would have recognized. She shaded her eyes against the sun, trying to make out the visitor. "Lily, come here," she called, instinctively gathering her daughter close. The rider turned out to be a young man Emma didn't recognize, perhaps 17 or 18, with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. He reined his horse to a stop at the edge of the yard, removing his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Miller," he called. "Yes?" "Name's Timothy Walsh, Mom. I work over at the Mercantile in Pine Creek. Mr. Peterson sent me with a delivery." He patted a bulging saddlebag. "Said Mr. Miller ordered some things last week." Emma relaxed slightly. "Martha Peterson's husband, Samuel, ran the general store in town." "Of course. Thank you for bringing it all this way." The young man dismounted, leading his horse closer. "No trouble, ma'am. It's a nice ride. And Pa said I should see more of the territory while I'm young." He grinned, revealing a missing tooth. "Besides, Mr. Miller always pays fair, and Ma says that's worth remembering in a place where some folks try to cheat you if they think you're green." He handed her a package wrapped in brown paper. "This here's from Mrs. Peterson specifically. Said it was for you, not Mr. Miller." Surprised, Emma accepted the parcel. Martha Peterson had been civil but distant during Emma's brief visit to the store before the wedding. She hadn't expected any gesture of friendship from the woman. "Please thank her for me," Emma said. "Would you like some water before you head back?" "It's a hot day for riding." "That's mighty kind, ma'am. Water for me and my horse, both would be appreciated." While Timothy watered his mount at the trough, Emma poured him a cup from the kitchen pump Jackson had installed. The young man drank, gratefully, his eyes taking in the ranch with open curiosity. "This is a fine spread Mr. Miller's got," he commented. "Pa says he's built it up from nothing, mostly with his own 2 hands. He works very hard," Emma agreed. Timothy nodded, handing back the empty cup. "Folks in town were surprised when he got married so sudden-like. Some said—" He stopped abruptly, flushing to the roots of his red hair. "Begging your pardon, ma'am. Not my place to repeat gossip." "It's all right," Emma said, though her stomach tightened. "I'm aware that our circumstances are unusual." The young man shifted uncomfortably. "It's just that Mr. Miller's always kept to himself is all. Then, suddenly he's married with a ready-made family." He glanced at Lily, who was watching him with frank curiosity. "But Pa says a man gets tired of loneliness, and who's to judge if he found himself a good woman willing to make a home out here?" Emma wasn't sure whether to be offended or amused by the assessment. Before she could decide, Timothy cleared his throat awkwardly. "Anyways, I'd best be getting back. Store will be busy with the cattle buyers in town this week." He settled his hat back on his head and mounted his horse with the easy grace of someone raised in the saddle. "Thank you for the water, Mrs. Miller, miss." He tipped his hat to Lily, who giggled and waved. After he'd ridden away, Emma unwrapped the package from Martha Peterson. Inside was a length of blue calico fabric, surprisingly fine, with a note written in a neat hand. "For the child. Every girl needs a new dress now and then. MP." Emma ran her fingers over the soft material, unexpectedly touched by the gesture. Perhaps not everyone in Pine Creek viewed her with suspicion or judgment. That evening, as she prepared supper, Emma found herself watching the clock with increasing anxiety. Jackson and Frank should have returned by now. The cattle move to the upper pasture was supposed to take most of the day, but not extend into nightfall. Lily had grown restless as well, asking repeatedly when Papa Jack would be home. Emma set her to arranging biscuits on a baking sheet, trying to distract them both from worry. "Riders coming!" Lily suddenly shouted, her sharp ears catching the sound of hoofbeats before Emma did. Relief flooded through her as she stepped onto the porch and saw two familiar figures approaching in the gathering dusk. But as they drew closer, Emma's relief turned to concern. Frank was leading Jackson's horse, and Jackson himself was slumped in the saddle, one arm held stiffly against his body. "What happened?" she called, hurrying down the steps as they reached the yard. "Bull got ornery," Frank explained tersely, dismounting. "Caught the boss against the fence. Nothing broken far as I can tell, but he's bruised up something fierce." Jackson tried to dismount on his own and nearly fell. Frank caught him, supporting his weight as they made their way to the house. Emma rushed ahead to open the door, her heart racing. "Papa Jack hurt?" Lily asked, eyes wide with concern. "Just a little, sweetheart," Emma assured her, though Jackson's pallor and labored breathing suggested otherwise. "Can you be my special helper and get fresh water from the pump? And then perhaps you could show Frank where we keep the bandages." The child nodded solemnly, eager to help. Emma guided Jackson to the sofa in the front room, while Frank took care of the horses. "I'm fine," Jackson muttered, wincing as he sat. "Just got the wind knocked out of me." "Let me see," Emma said firmly, her tone brooking no argument. With careful fingers, she helped him remove his shirt, revealing an angry purple bruise spreading across his left side and back. She gasped at the extent of it. "The bull caught me against the fence posts," Jackson explained, trying to make light of it. "Darn fool animal. Decided he liked the lower pasture just fine." Emma gently probed the area, relieved to find no obvious breaks, but concerned about the possibility of internal injuries. "You need to rest. And we should send for the doctor." Jackson shook his head. "No need to fetch Bennett all the way out here for some bruises. I've had worse." "At least let me bind your ribs," she insisted. "It will help with the pain." He acquiesced with a nod, sitting still as she worked. Emma wrapped the bandages firmly around his torso, her fingers occasionally brushing against his skin. It was the closest physical contact they had shared in their 2 months of marriage, and she found herself unexpectedly aware of the intimacy, of the lean strength beneath her hands. Jackson seemed to feel it too. His breathing changed subtly, and when she looked up, his gaze held something beyond pain or gratitude. Lily returned with the water, breaking the moment. Emma stepped back, suddenly self-conscious. "All better, Papa Jack?" Lily asked, carefully handing him the cup. "Much better, little one," he assured her, his voice gentler than Emma had ever heard it. "Your mama has healing hands." Frank joined them, having seen to the horses and satisfied himself that his boss wasn't seriously injured. "Supper smells good, Mrs. Miller. Reckon I could eat a whole steer after today." Emma welcomed the return to normalcy. "It's just stew and biscuits, but there's plenty," and Lily helped make cinnamon cookies for dessert. During the meal, Frank recounted the day's adventures, editing the more dramatic parts for Lily's benefit. The child listened with rapt attention, clearly adoring the gruff older man who had gradually warmed to her presence at the ranch. And then, Frank said, reaching for his third biscuit, "Your Papa Jack stood his ground against that ornery bull, just like he was 10 feet tall and bulletproof." "Were you scared?" Lily asked Jackson, her eyes wide. He considered the question with the seriousness he always showed when speaking to her. "Yes," he admitted. "Being afraid is natural when you're in danger. The trick is doing what needs doing anyway." Emma found herself watching him, struck by his honesty. Many men would have puffed up their courage for a child's benefit, but Jackson offered the truth instead, and a lesson within it. After Lily was tucked into bed, her prayers including special thanks for Papa Jack's safety, Emma returned to the kitchen to find Jackson attempting to help Frank with the dishes despite his injury. "You should be resting," she scolded, taking the dish towel from his hands. "I've imposed enough," he said. "Frank's got his own cabin to get to, and you've been on your feet all day." "I can manage," Emma insisted. Dr. Bennett may not be here to enforce it, but you need to take care. With those ribs. Frank hid a smile as he dried his hands. Boss, I'd listen to the lady if I were you. She's got that same look Sarah used to get when you were being stubborn about something. An uncomfortable silence fell at the mention of Jackson's late wife. Frank looked immediately contrite, as if he'd crossed an invisible boundary. I'll head out, he said quickly. See you at first light, boss. He nodded to Emma. Mrs. Miller, thank you for supper. After he left, Emma busied herself with the remaining dishes, uncertain how to navigate the sudden tension. Jackson remained at the table, watching her with an unreadable expression. Frank thinks highly of you, he said finally. Emma kept her eyes on her task. He's a good man. Lily adores him. She adores any creature that shows her kindness, Jackson observed. A rare quality. Most of us grow more suspicious with age. Something in his tone made Emma turn. Do you regret it, this arrangement? He looked startled by the direct question. No. Do you? No, she admitted. Though I sometimes wonder what you expected when you made your offer, if the reality matches what you hoped for. Jackson's gaze dropped to his hands, strong and calloused from years of ranch work. I didn't allow myself to hope for much, he said quietly. Companionship, perhaps. Someone to share the work. I didn't expect... He trailed off. Expect what? Lily, he said simply. The way she lights up a room, how she names every animal on the place, even the chickens. The way she leaves her dolls in my boots for safekeeping. A faint smile crossed his face. I didn't expect to care so quickly. The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Emma felt something shift in her understanding of this quiet man. Not just the husband of convenience she had accepted, out of desperation, but someone capable of deep feeling beneath his reserved exterior. And me? She asked, the question escaping before she could reconsider. What did you expect of me? Jackson met her eyes. I expected a woman desperate enough to marry a stranger. What I found was someone brave enough to build a new life from nothing, someone who protects her child like a mother wolf, who works from sunrise to sunset without complaint, who makes this house feel like... He stopped, seeming to search for the right word. Like what? Like a home, he finished. Like it hasn't felt since Sarah died. Emma set down the dish she'd been drying, her hands suddenly unsteady. I never meant to replace her. You haven't, he said gently, and shouldn't try to. Sarah was... She was sunrise, bright and full of certainty about everything. Always. Sure, the world could be made better through sheer determination. It was the most he had ever said about his late wife, and Emma found herself hungry for understanding. She sounds remarkable. She was. A shadow crossed his face. She was also wrong about some things, about this place. She thought we could reshape it to match the world she'd left behind. Bring civilization to the wilderness, she used to say. Emma considered this. And you? I always thought the wilderness had its own wisdom, if we bothered to listen. He shifted, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured side. Sarah loved the idea of ranch life more than the reality of it. The isolation wore on her. The endless work, the way time passes differently here. Is that why you warned me? Emma asked, remembering his caution before she accepted his proposal. You said it wouldn't be easy. He nodded. I didn't want to bring another woman out here under false pretenses. This life breaks some people. Yet you risked it again, with me. Jackson's eyes held hers. You seemed like someone who had already been broken and mended yourself, stronger at the seams. The assessment was so accurate, it made Emma's breath catch. She had indeed been broken by James's death, by her parents' rejection, by the cruel judgment of Boston society. But she had refused to shatter completely, for Lily's sake and for her own. I should check your bandages before you sleep, she said. returning to practical matters to ground herself. He submitted to her care without protest, sitting still as she unwrapped the binding to examine the bruising. It had darkened further, spreading across his ribs in a mottled pattern of purple and blue. Emma winced in sympathy. "It looks worse than it feels," Jackson assured her, though his careful breathing suggested otherwise. "You'll sleep in my room tonight," she decided. "The bed is wider and you'll rest better than trying to fit on the sofa with these ribs." He started to protest, but she cut him off. "I'll take the sofa. This isn't a negotiation, Mr. Miller." A flicker of amusement crossed his face at her firm tone. "Yes, ma'am." Emma rewrapped his ribs, trying to maintain a clinical detachment despite their proximity. The house seemed very quiet, the ticking of the mantel clock and Jackson's measured breathing the only sounds. "Sarah would have liked you," he said unexpectedly, as Emma finished securing the bandage. The comment caught her off guard. "I doubt that. I'm not exactly the civilizing influence she aspired to be." "No," he agreed, "but you're honest. She valued that above most things." He hesitated, then added, "She would be glad the house has a child's laughter in it again." Emma's hands stilled. Again. Too late. Jackson seemed to realize what he had revealed. He looked away, jaw tightening. It was a long time ago. Jackson. She rarely used his first name, and it caught his attention. "Please." He exhaled slowly, careful of his ribs. Sarah was expecting when she got sick. The fever took them both. The simple statement, delivered with such restrained grief, pierced Emma's heart. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know." "No reason you should. It's not something I speak of." His voice was flat, controlled. "It was 7 months along. A boy," the doctor said. Emma thought of the room upstairs, the one Jackson had said was meant to be a nursery but never finished. She had assumed it was a project abandoned when Sarah died, not realizing the deeper loss it represented. "That's why you didn't hesitate when Thomas Reynolds rejected us," she said softly. "Because of Lily." "That's why you didn't hesitate when Thomas Reynolds rejected us," she said softly. "Because of Lily." Jackson nodded once, the movement barely perceptible. "No child should be seen as a burden, especially by a man who hasn't earned the right to be called father." The conviction in his voice made Emma's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She had spent so long defending Lily, protecting her from judgment, that finding someone who saw her daughter as a blessing rather than a complication still felt like a miracle. Without thinking, she reached out and took Jackson's hand. His fingers curled around hers after a moment's hesitation, warm and solid. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving us a home, for being kind to Lily." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, the touch gentle despite his calloused skin. "It's a poor man who can't recognize a treasure when it's offered to him." The words hung between them, simple but profound. Emma felt something shift, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the summer heat and everything to do with the man before her. For the first time since arriving at Broken Spur, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that this marriage of convenience might someday become something more, something built not on desperation or practicality, but on genuine understanding and shared purpose. "You should rest," she said, reluctantly withdrawing her hand. "Tomorrow will come early enough." Jackson nodded, accepting her help to stand. As they made their way upstairs, moving slowly to accommodate his injury, Emma realized that the house no longer felt like a stranger's home. Somewhere in the past 2 months, between hanging curtains and feeding chickens and learning the patterns of ranch life, Broken Spur had begun to feel like it belonged to her as well, not just a shelter, accepted out of necessity, but a place where she and Lily might truly belong. That night, as she settled onto the sofa with a quilt that Jackson had once told her Sarah had made during their first winter on the ranch, Emma found herself thinking not of the past, but of the future. For the first time in longer than she could remember, that future held possibility rather than mere survival. Outside, a coyote called to the rising moon, its voice echoing across the valley. Emma listened, no longer finding the wild sound alien or frightening. Like so much else about this place, it had become a part of the tapestry of her new life, unexpected, sometimes challenging, but increasingly familiar. She drifted towards sleep with the realization that she hadn't thought of Boston in days. The city that had once been her entire world now seemed distant and insubstantial compared to the solid reality of pine-covered hills, summer sweet grass, and the quiet strength of a man who saw value in what others had discarded. Autumn painted the Montana landscape in colors Emma had never imagined possible. The cottonwoods along the creek blazed golden against the evergreen backdrop of pine-covered hills. The grasses of the valley shifted from summer green to amber and bronze, rippling like a sea when the wind swept down from the mountains. Even the sky seemed different, deeper, more intensely blue than she had ever seen in Boston. 4 months had passed since her arrival at Broken Spur. 4 months of learning, adapting, and slowly finding her place in this wild, beautiful country. The rhythm of ranch life had become familiar now, the pre-dawn rising, the constant cycle of chores, the satisfaction of work completed by her own hands. What had once seemed overwhelming now felt merely challenging and occasionally even rewarding. After Jackson's injury, something had changed between them. The revelation about Sarah's pregnancy had broken down a barrier, allowing them to speak more openly about the past and, tentatively, about the future. They still maintained separate bedrooms, but the careful distance they had kept in the early weeks had gradually diminished. Now, as Emma worked in the garden harvesting the last of the season's vegetables before the first frost, she found herself humming a tune her mother had once sung while preserving summer's bounty for winter. The memory brought no pain, only a faint nostalgia, and the hope that she was creating similar memories for Lily, traditions and rhythms that would shape her daughter's understanding of home. "That's a pretty song," Lily said, carefully placing carrots in the basket beside Emma. At 5.5, she took her garden duties very seriously, examining each vegetable as if it were a precious gem. "My mother used to sing it," Emma replied, pulling another carrot from the rich soil. "When I was about your age." "Did she have a garden like ours?" "Not exactly. We lived in the city, so our garden was much smaller, but she grew herbs in pots on the windowsill and sometimes tomatoes on the small patch behind the house." "Do you miss her?" Lily asked, with a child's directness. Emma paused, considering how to answer truthfully without burdening her daughter. "Yes," she said finally. "I miss the mother I had when I was your age, the one who sang while she worked and taught me to sew straight seams. But not the one who was mean about me," Lily concluded, displaying the perceptiveness that sometimes startled Emma. "No," Emma admitted, "not that version." Her parents' reaction to her pregnancy had been swift and absolute, a choice between giving up her child for adoption or being cut off from family funds and future prospects. Emma had chosen Lily without hesitation, but the wound of that rejection had never fully healed. "Papa Jack says family is who loves you, not just who you're born to," Lily said, returning her attention to the carrots. "Like how he wasn't born. My papa, but he loves me anyway." Emma's heart swelled at the simple wisdom. "He's right about that." "And he loves you too," Lily added matter-of-factly. Emma's hands stilled in the soil. "Did he tell you that?" "No." Lily shrugged as if the answer were obvious. "But he looks at you the way Mr. Whiskers looks at cream, like you're the best thing ever." Emma couldn't help laughing at the comparison to the barn cat's devotion to stolen dairy. "Well, that's quite a compliment then." "Do you love him back?" Lily persisted, fixing her mother with James's amber eyes. The question caught Emma unprepared. Did she love Jackson Miller, the man who had offered them sanctuary when they had nowhere else to turn? Who treated Lily with gentle patience and Emma with quiet respect, who worked from dawn until dusk to provide for them, yet never expected servitude in return. She had entered this marriage as a practical arrangement, expecting perhaps to develop affection over time. But in these past months, especially since his injury, she had begun to see Jackson differently, not just as provider and protector, but as a man with his own wounds and hopes, his own capacity for tenderness beneath the weathered exterior. "I care for him very much," Emma said carefully, "and I'm grateful for everything he's done for us." Lily seemed to accept this answer, though her expression suggested she found adult relationships unnecessarily complicated. They continued harvesting in companionable silence until the sound of approaching horses announced Jackson and Frank's return from checking fence lines in the north pasture. Jackson dismounted with the fluid grace that still sometimes caught Emma by surprise. How a man so tall could move with such economy, each action deliberate and sure. His eyes found hers. Immediately, a brief smile warming his features before he turned to help Frank unload supplies. Emma watched him, struck by Lily's observation. Did he truly look at her with such obvious affection? And more troubling, was she the only one who hadn't noticed? That evening, after supper had been cleared and Lily tucked into bed, Emma sat at the kitchen table slicing apples for drying. Jackson settled across from her, hands busy cleaning his revolver, a task he performed weekly with methodical care. "Martha Peterson sent a note with Frank today," he said, not looking up from his work. "There's to be a harvest dance in town next Saturday. She specifically invited us to attend." Emma's hands paused midway through slicing an apple. "Us? You? Me and Lily, if you think she's old enough for such things?" Jackson glanced up. "Martha mentioned that several families will be bringing children." A social invitation from Pine Creek was unexpected. Though Emma and Jackson had encountered townspeople during their infrequent trips for supplies, the reception had been mixed. A few friendly greetings, many curious stares, and some deliberate snubs, particularly from Eleanor Reynolds and her circle. "Do you want to go?" Emma asked carefully. Jackson reassembled the revolver with practiced movements. "Might be good for Lily to spend time with other children, and for you to meet some of the women from town under better circumstances. What about you?" A faint smile touched his lips. "I've never been much for dancing, but I'm willing if you are." Emma considered the invitation. A harvest dance meant music, conversation, perhaps even new friendships. It also meant scrutiny. The mail-order bride rejected by Thomas Reynolds, now appearing as Mrs. Jackson Miller, would certainly attract attention. "I'd like to go," she decided, "for Lily's sake, if nothing else, though I don't have anything suitable to wear for a dance." "The blue dress you wore for our wedding looks fine to me," Jackson said. The compliment, delivered so matter-of-factly that Emma almost missed it. "That's kind of you to say, but it's hardly appropriate for a social occasion. It's just my second-best traveling dress." Emma had been too focused on practicality when packing for Montana to bring any purely decorative clothing. Jackson considered this problem with the same seriousness he applied to ranch matters. "There's that length of calico Martha sent for Lily. Is there enough to make something for yourself as well?" "Not for a grown woman's dress," Emma said. "But I could perhaps trim my grey dress with it, add a new collar and cuffs." Her mind was already calculating yardage and stitches, the familiar comfort of sewing problems, replacing her anxiety about the social event. Jackson nodded, satisfied that a solution had been found. "I'll have your answer sent back with tomorrow's mail wagon." He stood, checking that the revolver was secure before returning it to its place near the door. Then, in a gesture that had become habitual in recent weeks, he paused beside her chair and lightly touched her shoulder. "Good night, Emma." The simple contact, warm through the fabric of her dress, lingered after he had gone upstairs. Emma finished slicing apples by lamplight, her thoughts on blue calico and harvest dances, and the gradual, unexpected evolution of her feelings for the quiet man who had become her husband. The week before, the dance passed in a flurry of preparations. Emma reworked her grey dress in the evenings after regular chores were complete, adding a collar and cuffs of the blue calico and concealing the worn sections with careful pleating. For Lily, she created a new dress from the remaining fabric, complete with a matching ribbon for her dark curls. Jackson watched these domestic transformations with interest, occasionally offering an opinion when asked, but mostly content to sit by the fire with one of his books while Emma sewed and Lily practiced her letters at the table. These quiet evenings had become Emma's favorite part of ranch life. The work of the day complete, the three of them together in the warm glow of lamplight, secure against the increasing chill of autumn nights. Sometimes Jackson would read aloud from one of his books, his deep voice giving life to stories of adventure or history. Other times, they simply occupied the same space in companionable silence, each engaged in their own tasks, yet somehow connected. On the afternoon of the dance, Emma sent Jackson and Frank out of the house so she could heat water for proper baths for herself and Lily. The luxury of abundant hot water and privacy to use it was still novel after years of shared facilities in Boston tenements. "Will there be other little girls at the dance, Mama?" Lily asked as Emma braided her freshly washed hair. "I expect so," Emma replied, weaving the blue ribbon through the dark strands. "Mrs. Peterson mentioned that other families would bring their children. What if they don't like me?" The question revealed a vulnerability beneath Lily's usual confidence. Emma turned her daughter to face her, hands gentle on small shoulders. "Anyone who takes the time to know you will like you. Very much," she assured her. "You're kind and clever and brave, all the best qualities a friend could want." Lily considered this seriously. "Papa Jack says sometimes people don't like others just because they're different or new. But that's their loss, not ours." Emma smiled, recognizing Jackson's pragmatic philosophy. "He's right about that too, but let's assume the best until proven otherwise, shall we?" By the time Jackson returned to the house, Emma and Lily were dressed in their refurbished finery, hair neatly arranged, boots polished to a respectable shine. He stopped in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to something warmer, more intense. "You both look beautiful," he said simply. "And you need to clean up before we leave," Emma replied, though his compliment had brought unexpected heat to her cheeks. "There's still hot water, and I've laid out your good shirt and vest." Jackson obediently disappeared upstairs, returning, a short while later transformed from rancher to gentleman, or as close as his limited wardrobe allowed. He had trimmed his beard, slicked back his hair, and donned the outfit Emma had selected. The dark vest emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, while the white shirt contrasted with his sun-darkened skin. "Will I do?" he asked, a hint of self-consciousness in his voice. "You look very handsome, Papa Jack," Lily declared, saving Emma from having to put her own thoughts into words. They traveled to town in the wagon rather than the buckboard, which Jackson had lined with fresh straw and blankets to keep them comfortable and clean on the journey. As they approached Pine Creek, Emma felt her anxiety return. The town represented her lowest moment: rejection, destitution, humiliation. She hadn't returned since the day after her wedding, when Jackson had brought her to purchase basic supplies. "Nervous?" Jackson asked quietly, noting her tension. "A little," she admitted. "Last time I was here, I was an object of scandal and pity." He nodded, understanding without further explanation. "Things change. You're Mrs. Miller now, mistress of one of the more successful ranches in the county. You belong here as much as anyone." The confidence in his voice steadied her. When they arrived at the town hall, normally used for council meetings and court sessions, now transformed with lanterns and harvest decorations, Jackson helped her. and Lily down from the wagon with formal courtesy, offering his arm to escort them inside. The large room was already filled with people, music, and the hum of conversation. Couples circled the dance floor to the lively tune of fiddles and a piano slightly out of tune from the autumn dampness. Tables along one wall held platters of food and a large bowl of cider. Children darted between groups of adults, their excitement palpable in the festive atmosphere. Emma felt eyes turn toward them as they entered, conversations briefly pausing. Before resuming with new energy, she held her head high, grateful for Jackson's solid presence beside her and Lily's warm hand in hers. Martha Peterson detached herself from a group of women and approached, her expression welcoming. "Mrs. Miller, I'm so glad you could come." She bent slightly to address Lily. "And Miss Lily, what a lovely dress. Did your mother make it?" Lily nodded, suddenly shy in the unfamiliar environment. "From the blue cloth you sent." "Thank you, ma'am." Martha smiled, clearly charmed. "You're very welcome. There are some children your age over by the refreshment table, helping themselves to cookies. Would you like to meet them?" Lily looked up at Emma for permission, excitement warring with nervousness in her expression. "Go ahead," Emma encouraged. "I'll be right here if you need me." They watched as Martha led Lily toward a group of children gathered around the sweets. A girl about Lily's age immediately made room for her, offering what appeared to be half of her own cookie in greeting. "Ah, children are often kinder than adults," Jackson observed. "Until they're taught otherwise," Emma agreed. Over the next hour, Emma found herself cautiously welcomed into the community of ranch and town wives. Martha's acceptance served as a signal to others that the new Mrs. Miller was to be included rather than ostracized. Several women commented admiringly on the clever use of calico trim on her dress, opening conversations about sewing techniques that gradually expanded to include discussions of gardening, preserving, and the challenges of raising children so far from established schools. Jackson remained nearby, engaged in conversations with neighboring ranchers about cattle prices and the approaching winter, but his eyes frequently sought Emma across the room, as if reassuring himself of her comfort. In this new social setting, Eleanor Reynolds and her son were notably absent, a fact Martha Peterson explained with poorly concealed satisfaction. "They've gone to Helena for the winter. Thomas's new wife finds our little town lacking in refinement, it seems. Though how she expects to manage as a rancher's wife with such delicate sensibilities is beyond me." Emma hadn't known that Thomas had remarried so quickly. "I hope they'll be very happy," she said diplomatically. Martha's shrewd eyes assessed her. "You're more generous than most would be after how he treated you. But then, it worked out. For the best, didn't it?" She glanced meaningfully toward Jackson, who was demonstrating proper lasso technique to an admiring group of boys, Lily watching proudly from nearby. "Yes," Emma agreed, surprising herself with the depth of conviction in her voice. "It did." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and couples moved onto the dance floor. Martha's husband appeared to claim her, leaving Emma standing alone at the edge of the room. She watched the dancers, enjoying the swirl of color and movement when Jackson approached. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Miller?" he asked, formally extending his hand. Emma hesitated. "I thought you didn't dance." "I said I wasn't much for dancing," he corrected, "not that I couldn't if properly motivated." His eyes held a warmth that made her breath catch. Emma placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the floor. His hand settled at her waist, respectful yet secure, while the other clasped hers with surprising gentleness for a man who worked with rope and leather daily. They moved together with unexpected harmony, finding a rhythm that suited them both. Jackson wasn't a practiced dancer, but he had a natural sense of timing and led with the same quiet confidence he brought to everything else. "You dance very well for someone who claims not to enjoy it," Emma observed, looking up to find his eyes already on her face. "I have the right partner," he replied simply. The words, delivered without artifice, affected Emma more profoundly than any elaborate compliment might have. For a moment, the crowded room seemed to fade around them, leaving only the music and the man before her. This man who had offered shelter when she needed it most, who had seen value in her when others saw only inconvenience, who now looked at her as if she was something precious. The dance ended too soon. As they moved to rejoin the others, Sheriff Caleb Davis intercepted. In them, his expression unusually serious for the festive occasion. "Miller," he greeted Jackson with a nod. "Mrs. Miller, enjoying the evening?" "Very much," Emma replied. "It's a wonderful gathering." The sheriff's eyes flickered to Jackson. "Hate to interrupt your evening, but there's a matter I need to discuss. Privately, if possible." Jackson's expression revealed nothing, but Emma felt him tense beside her. "Now?" Davis nodded. "Won't take long. Mrs. Miller, perhaps you'd like to check on your daughter while we step outside." Something in the sheriff's tone made Emma uneasy, but she nodded, squeezing Jackson's hand briefly before moving to where Lily was playing a clapping game with her new friends. Through the window, Emma could see the two men in serious conversation beneath one of the lanterns hanging from the town hall porch. Jackson's posture grew increasingly rigid as the sheriff spoke, his face hardening into the impassive mask he wore when confronting difficulties. When they returned inside, Jackson sought her out immediately. "We need to head back to the ranch," he said, his voice low and controlled. "There's been trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Emma asked, dread pooling in her stomach. "Rustlers hit the Sorensen place last night, took nearly half their herd, and shot the foreman when he tried to stop them." His jaw tightened. "Sheriff thinks they might be working their way through the valley. Our place could be next." Emma glanced at Lily, laughing with the other children, blissfully unaware of adult concerns. "Should we be worried about more than cattle?" Jackson understood her real question. "Davis thinks they're just after the herds, not looking to harm families. But I'd feel better knowing you and Lily were safe at home, with me and Frank keeping watch." They gathered Lily, explaining that it was time to leave with a simplified version of the truth that wouldn't frighten her. The child was tired enough from the evening's excitement not to protest much, though she insisted on saying proper goodbyes to her new friends with promises to see them again soon. The ride back to Broken Spur was quieter than their journey to town, Jackson vigilant as they traveled the moonlit road, his revolver now openly carried rather than stowed beneath the seat. Lily fell asleep against Emma's side, lulled by the wagon's gentle rocking. "Sheriff Davis said the rustlers took only the best stock," Jackson explained as they drove. "Knew exactly which animals to target. Suggests they might have inside knowledge. You think someone in Pine Creek is helping them? Or they've been watching the ranches, learning patterns." His expression was grim in the moonlight. "Either way, they're organized, dangerous." Emma's arms tightened around Lily's sleeping form. "What can we do?" "Frank and I will take turns standing watch. Keep the stock closer to the house pastures, and I'd feel better if you kept the shotgun handy." "When I'm not in the house," he glanced at her. "You do know how to use it?" Emma nodded. Jackson had insisted on teaching her basic firearms handling within their first month at the ranch, despite her initial reluctance. "I can handle the shotgun, but surely they wouldn't." "Probably not," he agreed. "But I won't take chances. Not with you and Lily." The fierce protectiveness in his voice warmed her despite the worry. When they reached the ranch, Jackson carried the still sleeping Lily inside and up to her room, while Emma lit lamps and checked that all was as they had left it. After settling Lily in bed, they met in the kitchen, both still processing the abrupt shift from celebration to vigilance. Emma put water on to boil for coffee, knowing sleep would be impossible until they had talked through what might lie ahead. "Frank will be over at first light," Jackson said, removing his good vest and rolling up his shirt sleeves. "We'll move the best breeding stock to the home pasture, keep the rest within sight of the ranch house." Emma nodded, setting out cups. Should we be concerned about the horses if these men are targeting valuable stock? Already thought of that. We'll bring Butterscotch and the other saddle horses into the barn at night. Leave only the work horses in the corral. They continued discussing practical arrangements, adjustments to daily routines, signals in case of trouble, contingency plans if the worst should happen. Throughout it all, Emma was struck by Jackson's calm, methodical approach to the threat, and by her own surprising steadiness in the face of danger. In Boston, the mere idea of armed men threatening her home would have paralyzed her with terror. But here, beside this man who had faced hardship with quiet strength, she found herself focused and clear-headed. "You're taking this remarkably well," Jackson observed as they finished their coffee. "Is there an alternative?" Emma asked pragmatically. "Falling apart won't protect our home or our family." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes at her use of "our," a recognition of how completely she had accepted Broken Spur as her own. Without warning, he reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused thumb tracing her knuckles in a gesture both gentle and possessive. "Whatever comes," he said quietly, "we face it together." The simple declaration held more power than any passionate avowal might have. In that moment, Emma recognized that what had begun as an arrangement of necessity had evolved into a true partnership, not just in name or in practical matters, but in the deeper sense of two people wholly committed to each other's welfare. And with that recognition came another, more startling revelation. Somewhere between doing laundry and mending fences, between Lily's bedtime stories and quiet evenings by the fire, she had fallen in love with Jackson Miller. The realization should have frightened her. Love had brought her nothing but pain before. James's death, her parents' rejection, the cruel judgment of society. Yet this felt different. Not the desperate, all-consuming passion of her youth, but something steadier and more enduring. Oh, love built on respect and shared purpose, on seeing and being seen truly. "Together," she agreed, turning her hand to clasp his. "Always." Jackson's eyes darkened at her tone, at the promise implicit in the word. For a moment, Emma thought he might speak, might give voice to the feelings that had been growing between them these past months. Instead, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so intimate it made her breath catch. "I should check the property before turning in," he said, releasing her hand reluctantly. "Lock the door behind me. I'll knock 3 times when I return." After he left, Emma secured the house as directed, then climbed the stairs to check on Lily. The child slept peacefully, untroubled by adult concerns, her new blue ribbon still wound through her braid. Emma straightened the quilt, then stood watching her daughter's even breathing by the soft glow of the night lamp. So much had changed since they had boarded that train to Montana. What had begun as desperate flight from one life had somehow transformed into the deliberate building of another. A life with purpose and belonging, with roots that grew deeper with each passing day. Whatever dangers lay ahead, Emma knew with bone-deep certainty that they would face them, as Jackson had said, together, as a family. Not because circumstances had thrown them together, but because they had chosen each other, day by day, through shared work and quiet evenings, through laughter and occasional tears, through the gradual, miraculous alchemy that transforms strangers into beloved family. Outside, she heard Jackson's boots on the porch, followed by the promised 3 knocks. Emma went to let him in, carrying within her the newfound certainty of her feelings and the hope that, when the time was right, she would find the courage to speak them aloud. Winter descended on Broken Spur with a fury Emma had never experienced. In Boston, the first snow fell in early November, dusting the pine-covered hills with white that melted by noon. But in late November, A true Montana blizzard swept across the valley, howling like a living thing as it piled drifts against the house and turned the familiar landscape into something alien and treacherous. For 3 days, they were effectively isolated, Jackson and Frank venturing out only to tend to essential tasks in the barn, connected to the house by a rope line to prevent becoming lost in the swirling white void. Emma kept the stove burning constantly, melting snow for additional water when the kitchen pump froze, despite Jackson's efforts to insulate it. Lily, initially enchanted by the snow, grew restless with confinement. Emma organized treasure hunts throughout the house, revived half-remembered parlor games from her childhood, and encouraged Jackson to share stories of his travels when evening brought the family together around the fire. It was during one of these storytelling sessions, with Lily nestled against Jackson's side and Emma sewing by lamplight, that a pounding at the door startled them all. Jackson was on his feet instantly, motioning for Emma to take Lily upstairs, while he retrieved his revolver from its place near the door. Frank, who had been waiting out the storm in the spare room rather than trying to reach his cabin, joined him with a rifle already in hand. "Who's there?" Jackson called, positioning himself to the side of the door rather than directly in front of it. "Help!" came a man's voice, nearly lost in the howling wind. "For God's sake, help us!" Jackson and Frank exchanged glances. With rustlers still active in the valley, 3 more ranches had been hit in the weeks following the harvest dance. Caution was essential, but leaving anyone outside in such weather was a death sentence. "Identify yourself," Jackson demanded through the door. "Timothy Walsh," the voice called back, "from the Mercantile. I've got Samuel Peterson with me. His wagon overturned on the North Road. He's hurt bad." Emma, who had paused at the bottom of the stairs with Lily, gasped softly. She remembered the red-haired young man who had delivered Martha's package months earlier. Jackson nodded to Frank, who positioned himself with a clear line of fire toward the door, then cautiously opened it. A blast of snow and frigid air swept in, along with 2 snow-covered figures. The first was indeed Timothy Walsh, his signature red hair barely visible beneath a snow-crusted hat. The second was Samuel Peterson, Martha's husband, his face gray with pain and cold as Timothy half-carried him inside. "Thank God," Timothy gasped, his lips blue with cold. "Thought we might not make it. Saw your lamp from the road." Jackson secured the door against the storm, while Emma hurried forward to help with the injured man. Samuel's right leg was wrapped in a makeshift splint fashioned from broken wagon slats and strips of harness leather. "Broke it when the wagon went over," Timothy explained as they helped Samuel to the sofa. "Horse spooked at something in the snow. Wagon turned clean over. We tried to make it back to town, but the storm got worse. Saw your light and took a chance." "You did right," Jackson assured him, helping Emma remove Samuel's frozen outer garments. "Frank, stoke up the fire. Emma will need hot water and bandages. The leg needs proper setting." Emma hurried to the kitchen, putting kettles on to boil. Behind her, she heard Jackson sending Lily upstairs, with reassurances that everything would be fine. The child went reluctantly, clearly torn between concern and curiosity about the unexpected visitors. With the water heating, Emma collected clean cloths, scissors, and strips of bedsheet she kept prepared for bandages. Rural life had taught her to be ready for emergencies. Cuts, burns, and broken bones were common hazards on a working ranch. When she returned to the front room, Samuel was more alert, though still ashen with pain. Timothy had shed his outer layers and was warming his hands by the fire, explaining how they had come to be caught in the storm. "We were bringing supplies back from Helena," he said. "Martha insisted Samuel go himself to select fabrics for Christmas dresses. Should have waited until the weather cleared, but the merchandise was due at the store this week." Jackson examined Samuel's injury with gentle but thorough hands. The storekeeper winced as Jackson carefully cut away the blood-soaked fabric of his trousers to reveal the break. "Compound fracture," Jackson said grimly. Bones broken through the skin. Needs to be set properly or he'll lose the leg. Emma's stomach clenched at the sight, but she kept her voice steady. What do you need me to do? Jackson glanced up, his expression softening momentarily at her calm competence. Clean the wound. First, then help me hold him while Frank and Timothy set the bone. I've never done anything like this, Timothy said nervously, looking pale beneath his freckles. I have, Frank spoke up. Field hospital during the war. Seen worse than this put right. Emma set to work cleaning the wound, while Jackson gave Samuel a generous measure of whiskey for the pain. The storekeeper drank it without complaint, then gripped the edges of the sofa as they prepared to set the bone. On 3, Jackson told Frank, who had positioned himself at Samuel's leg. On 2. He moved on 2 rather than 3, a mercy Emma recognized as Frank pulled and twisted in one swift motion. Samuel's scream echoed through the house, then he mercifully lost consciousness as the bone clicked back into place. Emma worked alongside Jackson to clean and bind the wound, their hands moving in wordless coordination, born from months of shared labor. Frank fashioned a proper splint from wood slats, while Timothy hovered anxiously, eager to help, but unsure how. He'll need a real doctor, Jackson said when they had done all they could, but not until this storm passes. Martha will be frantic, Timothy worried. She was expecting us back yesterday. No one travels in this weather, Frank said firmly. Not even for Martha Peterson's peace of mind. They made Samuel as comfortable as possible on the sofa. Then Emma prepared a late supper for the rest of them. Timothy consumed 3 bowls of stew and half a loaf of bread, the ordeal having apparently sharpened rather than diminished his appetite. So you're the mail-order bride, he said to Emma as she poured him more coffee, then immediately flushed with embarrassment. Begging your pardon, Mrs. Miller. That came out wrong. It's all right, Emma said, long since accustomed to being the subject of town gossip. Yes, I came to marry Thomas Reynolds originally. Life had other plans. Timothy nodded earnestly. Ma says it worked out better for everyone. Says Reynolds' new wife is a holy terror who's run off 3 household staff already. Jackson, returning from checking on Samuel, raised an eyebrow at the gossip but said nothing. Emma hid a smile, wondering what Martha would say about her son's loose tongue. They arranged sleeping accommodations as best they could with the unexpected guests. Samuel remaining on the sofa under Frank's watchful eye, Timothy on a pallet near the kitchen stove. Emma checked on Lily, who had finally fallen asleep after the excitement, then retired to her own room. She was brushing her hair before bed when a soft knock came at her door. Jackson stood in the hallway, his expression troubled. Samuel's. Fever is rising, he said quietly. The break was bad, bone fragments in the wound. If this storm doesn't let up soon... He didn't need to finish the thought. Emma had seen infection take hold before, had watched helplessly as James deteriorated from a seemingly minor wound after the robbery. Without proper medical attention, Samuel Peterson could lose more than his leg. What can we do? She asked. Watch him through the night. Keep the wound clean. Hope the storm breaks by morning. Jackson ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. I should ride for the doctor in Helena, but in this blizzard, you'd never make it, Emma finished firmly. And then we'd have 2 tragedies instead of preventing one. He sighed, his breath stirring a loose strand of her hair. You're right. We wait for morning and reassess. They stood together in the dim hallway, closer than propriety strictly allowed, neither making a move to increase the distance. In the month since the harvest dance and the rustler threat, something had shifted between them, a growing awareness, a deepening connection that remained largely unspoken but increasingly difficult to ignore. Try to rest, Jackson said finally. I'll take first watch with Samuel. Emma nodded, though she suspected sleep would prove elusive. "Wake me in a few hours. You need rest too." Later, she would remember the domesticity of that moment, standing in their home, discussing the care of others, sharing concerns and decisions as true partners. Despite the crisis unfolding downstairs, despite the storm raging outside, she had felt a profound sense of rightness in their connection. That feeling sustained her through the long night that followed, as Samuel's condition worsened and the storm showed no signs of abating. By dawn, they were all exhausted, taking turns bathing the storekeeper's forehead with cool cloths as fever ravaged his system. "We can't wait any longer," Jackson decided, as first light revealed a landscape still obscured by swirling snow. "I need to get to Helena for the doctor." "It's suicide," Frank argued. 15 miles in this? You won't make 5 before you lose the trail." "Then what do you suggest?" Jackson demanded, his voice sharp with fatigue and worry. "We sit here and watch him die? Watch Martha lose her husband because we were too cautious to try?" The raw emotion in his voice silenced the room. Emma understood suddenly that this was about more than Samuel Peterson. It was about Sarah, about the helplessness Jackson had felt watching his wife and unborn child slip away despite his best efforts to save them. "I'll go with you," Frank said after a moment. "Two have a better chance than one if something goes wrong." Jackson shook his head. "No, I need you here, protecting the ranch. Rustlers don't care about blizzards if they think everyone's guard is down. I can protect my family," Emma said quietly, drawing all eyes to her. "I know how to use the shotgun. Timothy can help as well. Frank should go with you." Jackson studied her face, seeing the determination there. After a long moment, he nodded. "Get provisioned," he told Frank. "We leave in 30 minutes." While the men prepared for the dangerous journey, Emma heated broth for Samuel, who had regained consciousness but remained disoriented with fever. Timothy hovered nearby, his youthful face lined with worry beyond his years. "My fault," he murmured as Emma tried to coax Samuel to swallow. "Should have insisted we wait out the weather in Helena." "Samuel is a grown man who made his own choice," Emma replied firmly. "Blaming yourself helps no one, least of all him." The young man nodded gratefully, straightening his shoulders. "What can I do to help while they're gone?" "Keep the fires. A Fed. Help me tend to Samuel, and be ready with that rifle if needed." Emma nodded toward the weapon Frank had pointedly left, leaning against the wall. "The rustler threat is still real, storm or no storm." Timothy swallowed hard, but nodded. "Yes, ma'am. My pa taught me to shoot. Not as good as Mr. Miller or Frank, but I can handle myself." Lily appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her face solemn as she watched the activity. "Is Mr. Peterson going to die?" she asked with a child's directness. Emma went to her, kneeling to meet her eyes. "We're doing everything we can to help him. Papa Jack and Frank are going to bring a doctor." Lily's eyes widened. "In the snowstorm? But you said no one should go out in a blizzard." "Sometimes," Emma said carefully, "we have to take risks to help others, even dangerous ones." "Like how you took a risk coming all the way to Montana?" Lily asked, displaying her uncanny ability to make connections that surprised adults. "Something like that," Emma agreed, smoothing her daughter's sleep-tousled hair. "Why don't you help me make breakfast for everyone? Papa Jack and Frank will need something hot before they leave." In the kitchen, Jackson was checking his revolver one last time, his movements deliberate despite the urgency of their situation. He looked up as Emma and Lily entered, his expression softening at the sight of them. "Lily, come here," he said, setting the weapon aside and opening his arms. The child ran to him without hesitation, allowing herself to be lifted onto his lap, despite her increasing insistence at other times that she was too grown up for such treatment. Jackson held her close, whispering something in her ear that made her nod solemnly. Emma busied herself with breakfast preparations, giving them a moment of privacy. When she turned back, Lily was carefully placing something in Jackson's shirt pocket, the small wooden horse he had carved for her months ago. "For luck," she explained, as Jackson raised questioning eyebrows at Emma. "Mama says you needed to come home safe." Jackson's eyes met Emma's over the child's head, full of unspoken emotion. "I'll always come home to you," he promised, the words clearly meant for both of them. Always. The parting that followed was brief by necessity. Emma stood on the porch with Lily and Timothy, watching Jackson and Frank ride into the swirling whiteness until they disappeared from view. Only then did she allow herself a moment of fear, a silent prayer for their safety before turning back to the tasks at hand. The day stretched endlessly, marked by Samuel's increasing restlessness and Lily's frequent trips to the window to check for returning riders. Emma kept them both occupied as best she could. Lily with small chores and simple lessons, Samuel with cool compresses and sips of broth when he was lucid enough to swallow. Timothy proved himself surprisingly capable, chopping wood without being asked and helping Emma change Samuel's bandages despite his obvious discomfort with the task. By late afternoon, he had even coaxed a smile from Lily with exaggerated stories about mishaps at the mercantile. "You're good with her," Emma observed as they prepared supper together, Lily having been sent to gather eggs from the covered henhouse near the back door. Timothy shrugged, ears reddening at the compliment. "Got 5 little sisters at home, used to helping with young'uns." "You've been a blessing today," Emma told him sincerely. "Jackson and Frank couldn't have gone for help if you hadn't been." "Here." The young man straightened at her words, pride evident in his stance. "Happy to help, Mrs. Miller. Mr. Miller's always treated me fair at the mercantile. Some of the other ranchers act like I'm still a child, but he respects honest work, regardless of age." Emma nodded, unsurprised by this insight into her husband's character. Jackson treated everyone with the same straightforward respect, from the littlest child to the oldest ranch hand, judging only by actions rather than circumstances or appearance. It was one of the many qualities that had gradually, inevitably, drawn her heart to his. Night fell early, the storm showing its first signs of weakening as stars occasionally appeared through breaks in the clouds. Emma sent Lily to bed with reassurances that Papa Jack would wake her when he returned, then settled in for another night of watching over Samuel. His fever had risen further, his breathing becoming increasingly labored. Emma changed the bandages, again grimly noting the angry red streaks extending from the wound up his leg, blood poisoning setting in despite their best efforts. "Martha," Samuel murmured, caught in delirium. "Tell Martha, the blue silk, she wanted—" "Shh," Emma soothed, bathing his forehead. "You can tell her yourself when you're better." But as midnight came and went with no sign of Jackson and Frank, Emma's optimism began to waver. The journey to Helena was treacherous even in good weather. In a blizzard, with darkness falling early and temperatures plummeting, it verged on impossible. Timothy dozed in Jackson's chair by the fire, the rifle across his knees. Emma paced between Samuel and the window, watching for any sign of approaching riders, straining to hear hoofbeats above the diminishing wind. Just before dawn, when hope had worn thin as ice on a spring pond, she heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses approaching at a steady pace. She flew to the door, Timothy waking with a start at her sudden movement. "They're back," she breathed, reaching for her shawl with trembling hands. Timothy was beside her in an instant, rifle at the ready, just in case the approaching riders weren't the ones they awaited. But as the figures emerged from the pre-dawn darkness, Emma recognized Jackson's broad shoulders and Frank's distinctive slouched posture in the saddle. Between them rode a third figure, a small, wiry man bundled against the cold, whom Emma guessed must be the doctor from Helena. She flung open the door, relief making her knees weak as Jackson dismounted with the stiff movements of a man who has ridden too long in bitter cold. He looked exhausted, his beard frosted with ice, but his eyes found hers immediately. "Samuel?" he asked, his voice rough from the cold. "Alive," she answered, "but the infection is spreading." The doctor, introduced as Bennett, wasted no time with pleasantries. He followed Emma directly to his patient, removing his coat as he went and calling for hot water, clean bandages, and better light. While Timothy helped Frank stable the horses, Jackson remained in the doorway, watching Emma with an intensity that made her breath catch. Without a word, he crossed to her and pulled her into his arms, holding her as if reassuring himself that she was real, that this place and these people he had ridden through a blizzard to save were worth the risk he had taken. Emma returned, his embrace without hesitation, feeling the cold of his clothing seep into her, but caring only that he was here, alive and whole. They stood together in the stillness of early morning, the connection between them transcending words or gestures. "I was so worried," she whispered against his chest, allowing the fear of the past day and night to surface now that danger had passed. His arms tightened around her. "I promised I'd come back." "Papa Jack!" Lily's voice broke the moment, the child flying down the stairs in her nightgown, having apparently heard the commotion despite their efforts to let her sleep. Jackson released Emma just in time to catch Lily as she launched herself at him, lifting her into a hug that made the child giggle despite the solemnity of the occasion. "You came back," she stated with satisfaction, as if she had never doubted it. "I promised, didn't I?" Jackson set her down but kept hold of her hand. "And I found your good luck charm very helpful." Lily beamed, then noticed the activity around Samuel. "Is that the doctor? Will he make Mr. Peterson better?" "He'll certainly try," Jackson assured her. "But right now I think everyone could. Use some breakfast. Do you think you could help your mother with that?" The familiar routine of preparing food steadied Emma after the emotional turbulence of the past days. As she moved around the kitchen, aware of Jackson watching her from the table where he sat with Lily, she felt a sense of completion, as if a circle had been drawn around the three of them, connecting them in a way that went beyond circumstance or convenience. Dr. Bennett emerged from the front room as they were finishing breakfast, his expression tired but satisfied. "The leg will heal," he announced, though it was a near thing. Another day without treatment, and he would have lost it, if not his life. Relief swept through the kitchen. Even Frank, not typically given to displays of emotion, closed his eyes. Too briefly in silent thanksgiving. "When can he be moved?" Jackson asked practically. "His wife will be frantic by now." "A day or two of rest first," Bennett prescribed. "Then a wagon with plenty of padding for the journey. I'll stay until he's stable enough to travel." Timothy volunteered to ride to town as soon as the trail was clear to bring Martha news of her husband's condition. The storm had passed during the night, leaving brilliant blue skies and pristine snow that glittered like diamond dust in the morning sun. While Frank showed Dr. Bennett to the spare room for some much-needed rest, Jackson finally went upstairs to change out of his frozen clothing and perhaps catch a few hours of sleep himself. Emma sent Lily out to collect more eggs, then began clearing the breakfast dishes. She was at the sink when she felt Jackson's presence behind her. He had changed into dry clothes, his hair still damp from washing, but he hadn't gone to rest, as she'd expected. "You should sleep," she said without turning. "You've been riding all night." "In a moment," he agreed, his voice closer now. "But there's something I need to say first." Emma turned then, drying her hands on her apron. Jackson stood before her, his expression more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen it. "When we were caught in that blizzard," he said quietly, "lost in the whiteout with nothing to guide us but instinct and hope, I had one thought clearer than all others." "What thought?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. that I needed to come home. His eyes held hers, unwavering. Not to the ranch or the house or the land, but to you and Lily, to my family. The word hung between them, simple but profound. When I married you, he continued, I thought I was offering shelter to a woman and child who needed it. I thought, perhaps in time, we might develop affection, companionship. I never expected. He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. Unusual for a man normally so precise in his speech. What didn't you expect? Emma prompted gently, her heart racing. To fall in love again, he finished simply. To find that the arrangement I offered out of compassion and loneliness had become the center of my world. Emma's breath caught at the plain-spoken declaration. No flowery phrases or romantic gestures, just the honest truth delivered with the same straightforward integrity Jackson brought to everything. I love you, Emma, he said, the words clearly unfamiliar but no less sincere for it. You and Lily both, and I needed you to know in case... She closed the distance between them before he could finish, her hands coming up to frame his face. In case nothing, she said firmly. We're your family. Not because you offered us shelter or security, but because we chose each other, because we belong together. Jackson's arms encircled Emma, holding her with a tenderness that belied his strength. For a long moment they simply stood together, neither speaking, both absorbing the profound shift that had occurred. Not suddenly, but gradually, like snow accumulating until the landscape is transformed. I should have told you sooner, he murmured against her hair. But I wasn't sure you felt the same way. Emma drew back just enough to meet his eyes. I've loved you since the night you told me about Sarah and the baby. When you opened your heart, even though it hurt. That's when I knew you were a man worth loving. A shadow of old grief crossed his face, but it no longer held the sharp edges of fresh pain. Sarah will always be part of me, he said honestly, but loving you doesn't diminish that. It's different, deeper in some ways. Because we chose each other, Emma said, understanding what he meant. Day by day, through difficulty and joy. He nodded, one calloused hand gently touching her cheek. I never expected to find this again, to want to find it. The moment was broken by the sound of Lily rushing back inside, boots stomping snow from the porch. Jackson stepped back, but his eyes held a promise of continuation when they could speak privately again. Spring came early to the valley that year, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots beneath. The crisis with Samuel Peterson had marked a turning point not just for Emma and Jackson's relationship, but for their place in the Pine Creek community. Martha's gratitude knew no bounds. She credited them with saving not just her husband's leg, but his life, and made sure everyone in town knew it. Even Eleanor Reynolds, who had returned from Helena with tales of Thomas's new wife's refined sensibilities, thawed slightly toward Emma when they encountered each other at the general store. The older woman had grudgingly acknowledged that perhaps there was more than one way to be a proper wife and mother, and that Emma's frontier resilience had proved its worth. With the warming weather came other changes. Frank, who had been silent witness to the growing bonds between Jackson, Emma, and Lily, announced his intention to claim a homestead plot adjacent to Broken Spur. At 62, he had decided it was time to build something of his own, though he would continue helping with the ranch in exchange for Jackson's assistance with his new cabin. Seems like you've got your own family now, he told Jackson gruffly as they repaired winter damage to the barn roof. Figure it's time I carved out my own place. Jackson had clasped his old friend's shoulder. You'll always be family too, Frank. To all of us. April brought a letter that Emma had stopped expecting from her parents in Boston. Her mother's precise handwriting on the envelope had made her hands tremble as she opened it, unsure whether to expect further condemnation or tentative reconciliation. Inside was a brief note, formal but not unkind, acknowledging receipt of the Christmas card Emma had sent months earlier. There were cautious inquiries about Lily's health and education, a mention of her father's retirement from the bank, and, most surprisingly, a question about whether they might be permitted to write to their granddaughter occasionally. "Will you answer them?" Jackson asked that evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains with gold and rose. Lily was already asleep upstairs, exhausted from helping plant the vegetable garden. Emma sighed, still conflicted. "I don't know. Part of me wants to give Lily the chance to know her grandparents. Another part remembers how quickly they turned their backs when I needed them most." Jackson was silent a moment, weighing his words. "People change," he said finally. "Sometimes it takes losing something precious to realize its value." "Speaking from experience?" Emma asked gently. He nodded, his eyes on the distant mountains. "When Sarah died, I thought I'd never let myself care that deeply again, the pain of losing her and our unborn son." He shook his head, still finding the memory difficult. "It seemed safer to keep the world at arm's length. What changed your mind?" His expression softened as he turned to her. "A stubborn woman and her daughter who wouldn't let me hide behind my walls, who showed me that loving again wasn't betraying what I'd lost, but honoring it." Emma leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Perhaps I should offer my parents the same chance," she said thoughtfully. "Not for their sake, but for Lily's. And perhaps a little for mine." The letter she eventually sent was careful but not cold, offering news of their life in Montana and cautious permission for correspondence with Lily, with the clear understanding that Emma would read any letters first. It wasn't full reconciliation, but it was an opening, a recognition that the past need not permanently define the future. As spring deepened toward summer, other changes came to Broken Spur. Jackson and Frank finished the addition to the house that had been planned the previous autumn, 2 more rooms extending from the west side, providing space for guests and, as Jackson had quietly suggested, perhaps eventually for more children. The suggestion had brought heat to Emma's cheeks, but also a smile to her lips. Their marriage, begun as a practical arrangement, had blossomed into true partnership in all ways, though they maintained proper discretion around others. In the privacy of their home, they had discovered the joy of physical love that matched the emotional bond they had forged. In June, nearly a year after Emma and Lily had stepped off the train in Pine Creek, Sheriff Davis brought news that the rustlers who had plagued the valley had been captured, a gang operating out of Helena with connections to the railroad, targeting ranches along the shipping routes. "Your neighbor Sorensen led the posse that caught them," Davis told Jackson as they shared coffee on the porch. "Recognized one of his own branded steers being loaded onto a cattle car." "Good news for the valley," Jackson said, relief evident in his voice. The threat of rustlers had been a constant shadow over their lives, requiring vigilance that had sometimes kept him away from home more than he'd liked. When Davis had gone, Emma joined Jackson on the porch, slipping her hand into his. "Does this mean you can stop sleeping with that rifle beside the bed?" she teased. He smiled, drawing her closer. "I might consider it, though I admit I've grown rather fond of what replaced it." She laughed softly, resting her head against his chest. At 30, Emma had never expected to find herself in Montana territory, married to a rancher, happier than she had ever imagined. And possible. Life had taken her down a path she couldn't have foreseen, but standing here, with Jackson's arms around her and Lily's laughter drifting from the garden where she played with her kitten, Emma couldn't imagine wanting any other destination. July brought the town's Independence Day celebration, a festive gathering that drew ranchers and townspeople from miles around. The Millers attended as a family, Lily proudly wearing a new dress Emma had sewn from fabric purchased at the Peterson store. Jackson had even conceded to a new shirt for the occasion, though he drew the line at the fancy boots Thomas Reynolds sported as he paraded around with his Helena-bred wife. "Some things never change," Martha Peterson observed to Emma as they watched Thomas holding court near the refreshment table, his voice carrying as he boasted about the fine breeding stock he'd recently acquired. "Still more concerned with appearances than substance?" "I'm grateful for it," Emma replied with a small smile. "If he hadn't been so concerned with appearances that day at the train station, I might never have found my way to Broken Spur." Martha's shrewd eyes assessed her. "You truly are happy there, aren't you? Not just making the best of circumstances." "I am," Emma confirmed, watching as Jackson patiently taught Lily and several other children how to properly toss horseshoes. "It wasn't what I expected when I came west, but it's become everything I never knew I wanted." "That's a rare gift," Martha said soberly, "finding joy instead of mere contentment." She touched Emma's arm briefly. "Samuel and I are hosting a small gathering next weekend. Nothing formal, just a few friends for supper. We'd be honored if you, Jackson, and Lily would join us." The invitation represented more than a social engagement. It was acceptance, not just of Emma as Jackson's wife, but of their family as valued members of the community. A year ago, she had stood on the train platform, humiliated and rejected. Now she was being welcomed into the homes of Pine Creek's most respected citizens. "We'd be delighted," Emma said, meaning it sincerely. Later, as twilight gathered and pine torches were lit around the celebration grounds, Jackson found her watching. Lily danced with the other children to the lively fiddle music. "Happy?" he asked, offering her a cup of cider. "Very," she replied, accepting both the drink and his presence beside her. "Martha invited us to supper next weekend." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "We've arrived, it seems. Next, they'll be asking me to join the town council." Emma laughed, knowing how little such positions of prominence appealed to him. "Heaven forbid. Though you'd bring more sense to it than most." His expression grew more serious as he studied her face in the golden torchlight. "I have something to ask you," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "What is it?" "I know we're already married in the eyes of the law and the community," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "But that was an arrangement made from necessity, not choice." Emma's heart quickened as she began to understand where this was leading. "I'd like to ask properly," Jackson continued. "Not as a man offering shelter to a woman in need, but as a man who loves his wife and wants to begin again, this time with everything clear between us." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Emma Wilson Miller, would you do me the honor of continuing to be my wife, not out of necessity or gratitude, but because we've chosen each other day by day?" Tears pricked Emma's eyes at the unexpected proposal. "Yes," she whispered, "1,000 times yes." The kiss they shared was brief, mindful of public propriety, but held the promise of deeper intimacy to come. When they parted, Emma saw Lily, watching them from the edge of the dancing area, her smile as bright as the torches illuminating the gathering. Jackson beckoned her over, lifting her into his arms with the ease of long practice. "What would you think," he asked her, "of having a little celebration at the ranch next month? A party just for us, to mark the day your mother and I were married." Lily's eyes lit up at the prospect of a party. "Can I help plan it? Can we have cake?" "Absolutely to both," Jackson assured her, his eyes meeting Emma's over their daughters. "Ed, it's about time we celebrated properly, don't you think?" And so, on a perfect August morning, with Frank and Martha and Samuel Peterson as witnesses, and Lily beaming in a new dress, Emma and Jackson Miller renewed their vows beneath the cottonwood trees by the creek. The words they spoke were simple, but heartfelt, acknowledging both the unexpected beginning of their union and the conscious choice to continue it. "Not because life threw us together," Jackson said, his voice steady as he held Emma's hands in his, "but because each day we choose each other anew. Not from necessity," Emma responded, "but from love freely given and joyfully received." As Lily stepped forward to place a garland of wildflowers over their joined hands, a ritual Emma remembered from her own childhood in Boston. The three of them stood together in the dappled sunlight, no longer strangers brought together by circumstance, but a family bound by choice, by shared struggles, and by the quiet, enduring love that grows strongest when planted in the rockiest soil. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.